This is how you win. Inner steel. You've already lost 100 times. The question is whether you'll lose one more time today, or finally learn what winning actually costs. There is a moment, and most people never talk about it, where a man stands completely alone, not because the world abandoned him, but because he chose the harder road when every voice around him pointed somewhere easier. That moment doesn't come with applause. It doesn't come with certainty. It comes quietly, like a test disguised as an ordinary morning. And in that moment, everything you are is on trial. This is not a video about motivation. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings pass. This is about something older, something harder, something that has carried men through war, through poverty, through betrayal, through loss, and brought them out the other side not just surviving, but transformed into something the world has no choice but to respect. This is about winning. Real winning. Not the curated version you see on a screen. The kind that leaves marks on you. The kind that doesn't happen to you. It happens through you. If you are new here, subscribe to Inner Steel. What we build in this channel doesn't fade when the video ends. Stay with this until the end. Because what you're about to hear may be the thing you needed to hear at exactly this point in your life. Point 1. Winning begins in the mind before it begins in the world. In 1914, Ernest Shackleton's ship, the Endurance, became trapped in the Antarctic ice. The vessel was crushed. 27 men were stranded on one of the most hostile surfaces on Earth. No rescue was coming, no communication was possible, no map existed for what lay ahead. Temperatures dropped to -40 degrees. They drifted on ice floes for months. They watched their ship sink. And yet, not a single man died. Shackleton had made a decision long before the ice took the ship. The decision was this: survival is not a circumstance, it is a commitment. Every morning, without fail, he maintained a standard. Hot meals. Assigned duties. Music in the evenings. He refused to let his men's minds drift into despair, because he understood what most people will never learn: the body fails only after the mind gives permission. He eventually sailed a lifeboat through the most treacherous waters on Earth, navigated 800 miles with a hand compass and dead reckoning, climbed an unmapped mountain range, and reached a whaling station to organize rescue for every single one of his men. Winning began in his mind the day the ice closed in. This is the first truth of winning that almost no one is willing to accept: the battle is internal before it is external. The man who learns to govern his own mind, to command his thoughts the way a general commands troops, has already gained an advantage over 90% of the people he will ever compete with. Not because those people lack talent. Not because they lack opportunity. But because they have never taken their own mind seriously as a battlefield. You cannot win in your relationships, your career, your finances, your health, or your purpose if the voice inside your head is working against you. That inner voice, the one that says you're not ready, the one that reminds you of every past failure, the one that calculates reasons to stay comfortable, that voice is not wisdom. It is conditioning. And conditioning can be reconditioned. The Stoics called it the dichotomy of control. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal, a journal he never intended anyone to read, that almost nothing in the external world is truly within our power. What is within our power is our judgment, our response, our discipline, and our commitment to virtue. He wrote this not as philosophy but as daily instruction to himself. The most powerful man in the known world was fighting the same inner battles you are fighting right now. Winning begins the moment you stop waiting for the world to become easier and start demanding more of yourself. The moment you stop auditing your failures and start studying your patterns. The moment you take your mind off autopilot and place it under your authority. Nothing changes outside until something shifts inside. That is not a spiritual platitude. That is the testimony of every person who has ever built something extraordinary from nothing. Point 2. You win by choosing your suffering. There is a quote attributed to the Stoic philosopher Epictetus, a man born into slavery, who became one of the most respected philosophers in Roman history. He said, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." He was not saying surrender. He was saying something far more dangerous to your excuses. Choose your response to reality, or reality will choose it for you. James Stockdale was a United States Navy pilot shot down over North Vietnam in 1965. He was the highest-ranking American POW in the Hanoi Hilton, a prison known for systematic torture, isolation, and psychological warfare. He spent 7.5 years there. He was tortured over 20 times. He had no release date. He had no idea if he would ever leave. And yet he survived. More than that, he came home and built a life of extraordinary purpose. He went on to earn a Congressional Medal of Honor and become a respected philosopher in his own right. When Jim Collins later asked Stockdale who didn't make it out, Stockdale said without hesitation, "The optimists." He explained that the men who kept saying, "We'll be out by Christmas," and then Christmas came and went, were the ones who eventually had their hearts broken beyond repair. They couldn't reconcile the hope they clung to with the brutal reality surrounding them. Stockdale survived because he chose his suffering deliberately. He accepted that the situation was terrible and made no pretense otherwise. But simultaneously, he never wavered in the belief that he would eventually prevail, not by a fixed date, but by an unbreakable commitment to endure. This is what most people misunderstand about winning. They believe winning means avoiding pain. It does not. It means choosing which pain you are willing to carry. Every direction in life comes with a cost. The pain of discipline or the pain of regret. The pain of hard conversations or the pain of festering resentment. The pain of building something slowly or the pain of watching others build what you imagined. The man who wins is not the man without pain. He is the man who chose his pain consciously, carries it without complaint, and allows it to forge something in him that comfort never could. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to struggle. What you are not allowed to do, if you want to win, is pretend the struggle isn't necessary. It is necessary. It is, in fact, the mechanism of your becoming. Point 3. Winning requires that you stop explaining yourself. In 1519, Hernán Cortés landed on the shores of what is now Mexico with a small fleet of ships and a force of soldiers vastly outnumbered by the civilization they intended to confront. Upon arrival, he gave an order that his men could barely believe. He ordered the ships burned. There would be no retreat. There would be no option to reconsider. There was only forward. Whether you admire or condemn Cortés as a historical figure, the strategic psychology of that moment is undeniable. When retreat is impossible, focus becomes absolute. When the option to quit is removed, something inside a man changes. He stops calculating escape and starts calculating victory. Most people spend an enormous portion of their mental energy maintaining a narrative, an explanation for why they haven't done the thing yet. They are waiting for the right moment. They are waiting until they feel ready. They are gathering more information. They are working up to it. They have reasons, and their reasons are detailed, and their reasons are often legitimate. And their reasons are keeping them exactly where they are. One of the quietest killers of potential is not laziness. It is the constant justification of inaction. The man who explains himself to everyone, who defends his choices, who seeks validation before moving, who adjusts his decisions based on whether others approve, that man is not living his own life. He is living a consensus. Winning does not require consensus. Winning requires commitment. When Theodore Roosevelt ran for re-election after his presidency, and was shot in the chest during a campaign stop in Milwaukee, he refused to go to the hospital. He felt the wound with his fingers, determined the bullet had not punctured his lung, and then walked onto the stage and delivered a 90-minute speech. He said to the crowd, "It takes more than that to kill a bull moose." He didn't explain the wound. He didn't seek permission to continue. He bled through his shirt and kept going. You do not owe the world an explanation for who you are becoming. You do not need to defend your ambition, justify your standards, or apologize for your refusal to remain small. The people who demand explanations from you are rarely the people who will be standing beside you when your choices finally produce results. Burn the ships. Move forward without the commentary. Let the results speak in a language that requires no translation. Point 4. Every winner has a private war no one else sees. Jack Ma failed his university entrance exam 3 times. He applied to Harvard 10 times and was rejected each time. He applied to 30 jobs after graduating, including a position at KFC, and was rejected by all of them. When KFC came to his city, 24 people applied. 23 were hired. Jack Ma was the one they turned away. He went on to build Alibaba, one of the largest companies in the history of commerce. At the height of his career, he was worth over $40 billion. But here is what gets omitted from that story. The years between the rejections and the success were not glamorous. They were not punctuated by moments of clarity and inspiration. They were years of grinding obscurity, of being told no so many times that most men would have permanently updated their self-image to match the world's assessment of them. They were years of private war. Every winner you have ever admired has a private war that you will never fully know. The fight they had with themselves at 2 in the morning when everything felt impossible. The moment they almost walked away. The relationship that collapsed because they were too consumed with building. The financial crisis that nobody knew about. The health scare they didn't mention. The betrayal they had to absorb in silence and keep moving. Public success is the visible fraction of private suffering. The iceberg metaphor is overused but remains true. What you see above the surface is a fraction of what exists below it. This matters for a specific reason. When you look at someone who has what you want, the discipline, the results, the composure, the life, and you feel that familiar sting of comparison, you are comparing your internal reality to their external presentation. You are comparing your full knowledge of your own struggle to your incomplete knowledge of theirs. Stop measuring yourself against the surface of another man's life. Your private war is not a sign that you are losing. Your private war is the price of the life you are building. And the fact that you are still fighting it, that you haven't walked away, that you haven't made peace with average, that you are still watching videos like this one at this hour, that is not desperation. That is evidence. Point 5. Winning demands that you master the art of patience. In 1961, a young man named Demosthenes, not the ancient orator, but a Greek-American amateur athlete, is not actually the story here. The story belongs to the original Demosthenes of Athens, born around 384 BC, who by all accounts should never have become one of the greatest orators in human history. He was born with a severe speech impediment. He was physically weak. He was mocked as a young man for his inability to speak clearly in public, which in ancient Athens was perhaps the most publicly humiliating failure available. The political and legal world ran entirely on the spoken word. A man who could not speak could not lead. Demosthenes did not accept this verdict. He built a private practice space underground, literally an underground chamber, so he could study without distraction. He shaved half his head to prevent himself from going out in public until his work was finished. He put pebbles under his tongue to force his mouth to work harder and build clarity around the impediment. He went to the ocean and practiced speaking over the sound of the waves to build projection and power. He practiced for years. He became, by the time of his public career, the voice that moved entire cities. His speeches against Philip of Macedon, the Philippics, were so powerful they became the template for political rhetoric for centuries. Cicero studied them. The founders of the American Republic studied them. The thing that should have disqualified him became, through years of patient deliberate practice, the very thing that made him irreplaceable. Patience is one of the most misunderstood weapons in the arsenal of a winner. In a culture obsessed with speed, rapid results, overnight transformation, 30-day challenges, patience is treated as a consolation prize for those who haven't found the shortcut yet. But there is no shortcut to mastery. There is no shortcut to genuine strength. There is no shortcut to a life built on a foundation solid enough to last. The man who is in a hurry to appear successful will build something that collapses under pressure. The man who is willing to spend years laying stone on stone, learning the craft quietly, absorbing failure as instruction rather than verdict, that man builds something that stands. Patience is not passive. It is not sitting and waiting for the world to recognize you. Patience is continuing to work, to improve, to invest, to refuse mediocrity, while the world has not yet noticed. It is trusting the process without demanding that the process announce itself on your timeline. If you are not yet where you want to be, subscribe to Inner Steel and stay. Because this is precisely the conversation that bridges where you are to where you are going, and it requires patience to hear it all the way through. Point 6. Winning means knowing what you are fighting for. Viktor Frankl was a Viennese psychiatrist who survived 4 Nazi concentration camps, including Auschwitz. His wife, his mother, his father, and his brother were killed in the camps. He survived with almost nothing. Upon liberation, he wrote Man's Search for Meaning, one of the most widely read books in human history. His central finding, the observation that emerged not from a laboratory but from the most extreme human suffering imaginable, was this: the men who survived were not the strongest physically. They were not the most strategically advantaged. They were the men who had a reason to live. He quoted Nietzsche: "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." The men who lost their why, who could no longer identify a person waiting for them, a purpose calling to them, a work demanding their return, those men deteriorated rapidly. The body, Frankl observed, followed the spirit. When the spirit found no reason to endure, the body stopped fighting. This is not simply a lesson about survival and extremity. It is a lesson about winning in ordinary life. Most men know what they want. Fewer know why they want it. And fewer still have gone deep enough into that why to find the layer that survives disappointment, failure, rejection, and the long, slow seasons when nothing seems to be moving. What are you fighting for? Not what you want. Not what would be nice. What are you fighting for in the way Frankl's survivors were fighting, with the understanding that without this thing, something essential in you stops being alive? A man without a deep why will abandon his goals the moment the cost exceeds his initial calculation. And the cost always exceeds the initial calculation. Always. The path is always longer, harder, and lonelier than it looked from the beginning. Without a why that goes all the way down, that is rooted in something real, something personal, something that matters more than your comfort, you will quit. Not because you are weak, but because you were fighting for something that didn't mean enough to endure. Find your why. Interrogate it. Make it specific. Make it personal. Make it the thing you would be ashamed to abandon. Then let it be the engine that drives every decision, every sacrifice, every morning when nothing inside you wants to get up and try again. Point 7. Winning requires that you build in silence. Leonardo da Vinci spent 4 years painting the Mona Lisa. Most of that time was invisible to the world. He carried the painting in his personal collection, worked on it, revised it, set it down, returned to it. Nobody was watching. Nobody was tracking his progress. There were no updates, no previews, no audience feedback. When it was finished, it was finished. There is something the modern world has done to the process of building. Social media has created an economy of process, where the act of becoming is performed publicly in real time, where the struggle is packaged and distributed for validation before the results exist. And this is not entirely without value. But it carries a hidden cost that destroys more builders than it develops. When you announce your goals before you achieve them, the brain receives a fraction of the reward that is supposed to come only from completion. The social acknowledgement of the intention becomes a substitute for the actual work. You feel, for a moment, like you have already won, and that feeling drains the urgency that would have carried you through the hard work. Beyond the neurological effect, there is the psychological pressure of performing your journey for an audience. When your process is public, failure becomes public. Pivots become public. Doubt becomes public. And rather than making adjustments based on truth, you begin making adjustments based on what looks good to observers who have no stake in your actual success. The greatest builders in history built in silence. Not because they were secretive or afraid, but because they understood that creation requires a kind of privacy, a protected interior space where the work can be imperfect, unfinished, and ugly before it becomes what it is meant to become. Andrew Carnegie did not announce his steel strategy while he was executing it. He simply executed it, at a scale and consistency that left his competitors unable to respond. By the time the world understood what he had built, it was already built. Build in silence. Not forever, but for long enough. Long enough that what you are creating has roots before it has an audience. long enough that your commitment is demonstrated by results rather than declarations. The work is the announcement. Everything before the work is just noise. Point 8. Winning means refusing to be defined by your worst moment. In 1955, a man named Johnny Cash was a struggling musician who had recently signed with Sun Records in Memphis. His personal life was unraveling: addiction, infidelity, explosive behavior that destroyed relationships and opportunities. For years he was as famous for his disasters as for his genius. He was banned from venues. He nearly burned down a national forest. He lost a marriage. He was found on the floor of a cave in Kentucky, having gone there to die, with no intention of walking back out. He walked back out. He went on to record some of the most enduring music in American history. His live album at Folsom Prison, recorded in front of inmates who had nothing left to perform for, became one of the best-selling records of the decade. He became known as the Man in Black. He became a cultural icon not in spite of his failures but in some ways because of them. Because he had been to the bottom, and he came back, and the music he made after the bottom was more honest than anything made from comfort. There is a question that sits at the center of every man's life at some point. Is this failure the last word on who I am? The world will say yes. The world is efficient with its assessments. You made a mistake and you became the mistake. You failed publicly and you became the failure. You hit a low and some people around you quietly reassigned your potential downward and never told you. The world is wrong. A man is not the sum of his worst moments. He is the sum of how he responded to them, what he built after them, what he chose to be on the other side of them. The worst moment of your life, if you survive it and refuse to let it define you, becomes the bedrock of your most authentic strength. Marcus Aurelius faced the near collapse of the Roman Empire. Plagues, wars on multiple fronts, treachery within his own court. He wrote in his private journal, written to no one but himself, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. What is standing in your way right now is not your obstacle. It is your material. It is the thing from which you will build what you cannot yet see. Do not let your worst moment become your identity. Let it become your foundation." Point 9. Winning means choosing your circle with ruthlessness and clarity. In 1879, a young Thomas Edison stood in his laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey, surrounded by a team of men he had personally selected, not primarily for their credentials but for their obsession. They had been working for months on the problem of the incandescent light bulb. They had tested over 6,000 materials for the filament. 6,000 failures. The people in that room were not there because it was convenient. They were not there because Edison was paying exceptionally well. They were there because they shared an orientation, a refusal to accept impossibility as a final answer. On October 21, 1879, a carbonized bamboo filament glowed for 13.5 hours. Your environment, specifically the people inside it, is one of the most powerful determinants of where you end up. Not because other people have magical power over you, but because humans are osmotic creatures. We absorb the standards, the language, the ambitions, and the emotional climates of the people we spend the most time with. A man who spends his primary hours around people who are comfortable with mediocrity will, slowly and without noticing, adjust his own tolerance for mediocrity upward. It is not dramatic. It is not a single conversation that ruins him. It is the cumulative effect of an environment that does not demand excellence, does not celebrate growth, and does not hold him to a standard worth maintaining. Conversely, a man who places himself in proximity to people who are genuinely building, who read, who sacrifice, who take responsibility, who refuse excuses, that man will find that his own standards rise not through effort but through exposure. This does not mean you must be ruthless or cold with the people you love. But it does mean you must be honest about which relationships are feeding your growth, and which are quietly draining it. It means it is acceptable, necessary, in fact, to invest your primary time in people who make you better. Jim Rohn said that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. The research on social influence bears this out. You are not immune to your environment. No one is. Choose accordingly. Point 10. Winning is a daily practice, not a destination. On April 12, 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human being to travel to space. He orbited the Earth in 108 minutes. When he returned, he was an international hero. Cities were named after him. His face appeared on postage stamps across the world. He shook hands with Khrushchev and was awarded the Order of Lenin. What the celebrations did not show were the years before. The daily physical training that pushed his body to extremes, the centrifuge sessions that tested whether his mind would hold under G-forces that blurred vision and collapsed consciousness, the thousands of hours of study, the selection process that eliminated hundreds of candidates before him, the quiet years of preparation that the world never watched. The 108 minutes of glory were the product of thousands of hours of invisible daily practice. This is the most uncomfortable truth of winning, and the one most people most desperately want to avoid. Winning is not a destination you arrive at. It is a practice you sustain. The man who wins once and then relaxes his standards does not remain a winner. The athlete who achieves physical excellence and then stops training does not remain excellent. The entrepreneur who builds a successful company and then stops learning, adapting, and demanding of himself does not remain successful. Winning is a verb. It requires continuous action. This does not mean you cannot rest. It means your rest is intentional and strategic, not a surrender to comfort. It means even in rest, you are managing your mind, protecting your energy, and preparing for the next movement. The ancient Japanese concept of kaizen, continuous improvement, is not a productivity framework. It is a philosophy of life. The idea that every single day contains the opportunity to become slightly more capable, slightly more disciplined, slightly more aligned with who you intend to be. Not dramatically. Not in ways the world will notice tomorrow. But cumulatively, over time, in ways that compound into something extraordinary. Think about this. If you improve by just 1% every single day for 1 year, you are 37 times better than you were at the start. 37 times. Not through some dramatic transformation. Through daily practice. The man who wins is not the man who had the greatest talent or the most favorable circumstances. He is the man who showed up with full commitment every day, especially the days when showing up felt useless, when no one was watching, when the results hadn't yet appeared, when every reasonable argument said to stop. He showed up anyway. He showed up because he understood that winning is not something that happens to you on a great day. It is something you build into the fabric of your days through every choice, every discipline, every refusal to take the easy road when the hard road was available. That is not a burden. That is the privilege of a man who takes himself seriously. Final chapter: the man you have yet to become. There is a version of you that exists beyond the comfort you are currently protecting, beyond the fear you are currently managing, beyond the excuses that have been, if you are honest with yourself, performing good work on your behalf for longer than you want to admit. That version of you is not a fantasy. He is not some idealized image that exists only in motivation videos and vision boards. He is the man that this version of you becomes when you stop treating your potential as something to admire and start treating it as something to be accountable to. He is built one decision at a time, one morning at a time, one choice to stay when every instinct says leave, one refusal to explain yourself when the world demands justification, one commitment to the work when the results haven't arrived yet. Every man who ever became someone worth becoming went through a period where nothing confirmed that he would. Where the evidence, if you were looking at it objectively, pointed away from him. Where rational people in his life were not unreasonable to doubt him. He kept going anyway. Not because he was certain. Certainty is not required. But because he had made a commitment to himself that was more binding than his fear. That is the final truth of winning that this video has been building toward. Winning is not given to the most talented. It is not given to the most fortunate. It is not given at all. It is claimed, quietly, privately, daily, by the man who refused to let the distance between where he is and where he is going become a reason to stop walking. You are closer than you think. Not because things are about to become easy, but because you have already proven, by the fact that you are still here, still listening, still refusing to make peace with less than what you are capable of, that you have exactly what winning requires. Now go build something the world hasn't seen yet. And if this landed, if something in this spoke to the version of you that is still fighting, still building, still refusing, subscribe to Inner Steel. Because what we do here is not entertainment. It is construction. One video, one idea, one shift in perspective at a time. See you in the next one.